Well, hello, good afternoon. Welcome back to Principles of Macroeconomics. I am your host, Dr. B. Appreciate you all taking the time to join me today to talk about a couple of very important topics, one of those being the cost of taxation. And we'll also talk about another important topic called international trade, both which have some significant impact on our daily lives. And yeah, we'll talk about those things, how they affect us on a regular basis, and yeah, we'll have some fun with it. Just want to call your attention to where we are in the classroom currently. So we are in the sixth week already. Six. Wow, holy smokes. Goes by so fast, doesn't it? So in week six, or in module two, week six, for those of you who are following along. And this week we'll have the chapter 8 quiz, which accompanies the chapter on taxation, and the chapter 9 homework assignment, which accompanies the conversation that we'll have on international trade. As always, a mix of questions, true, false, multiple choice. You have 2 attempts on every homework assignment and every quiz. I strongly recommend that you take advantage of those 2 attempts in order to earn the highest grade possible. So let's go ahead and talk about the concept of taxation. Oh, taxes. The taxes are one of the 2 things that you can never avoid in life. There are only 2 things in this world that you cannot ever avoid. I wish we could avoid taxes. It is one of the 2 things. Taxes and death are the 2 things that you cannot avoid in life. They both happen to us. So let's talk about the concept of taxation. The idea of taxes is really to fund governments. That is why we have taxes. That is how we fund our government. The federal government, the local government, the city government, federal, state, local. The way we fund our governments is through taxation. The tax jurisdictions tax the citizens that pay the taxes. A tax is simply a way to fund the government. It is their revenue. The government's revenue is taxation. We fund the government through taxes. Our tax dollars pay for the betterment of society. Betterment of society. Our tax dollars pay for the betterment of society through education, through infrastructure, through transportation. I could keep going. Housing, etc. Right? The list goes on and on. We pay taxes through income taxes, sales taxes, uh, general excise taxes, city taxes, taxes for use, etc. The list goes on and on. There's a lot of different types of taxes out there. And we all pay taxes in one way or another. We pay income tax, sales tax, excise tax, taxes on taxes. Yeah. So all these taxes that we pay as consumers can sometimes become a surplus. When the government has a surplus of tax funds, it is said that they have a surplus of revenue. And so we'll talk about these types of things. And we'll also talk about this concept called deadweight loss, uh, which is an interesting theory. So, as a quick review, a tax. A tax is what we buyers pay to the sellers on behalf of the government. The taxes that the seller collects from the buyers gets remitted to the various tax agencies. That's a sales tax. A tax can raise the price a buyer pays and lowers the price a seller receives because the buyer ultimately pays the tax, right? A tax can also reduce the quantity of goods bought and sold because it reduces the revenue for the seller. Taxes are typically imposed on the buyers or the sellers. It depends, right? With sales taxes, the way it works is you, the buyer, pay the sales tax to the seller, and the seller remits that tax to the tax agencies. Okay. The seller is typically a pass-through entity that simply collects the taxes from you, the buyer, and remits those taxes to the tax agencies. It works the same way with income tax. Your employer withholds federal, state, and local taxes and then remits those federal, state, and local taxes to the tax agencies. This employer is simply a bypass, a pass-through entity. Just as we have with goods, there is what we call equilibrium with tax, right? So equilibrium. Equilibrium, as you know, is where supply meets demand. That's the point of equilibrium. There's a price equilibrium and a quantity equilibrium. We know this from previous chapters. Now, I'm going to show you what it looks like before taxes and after taxes. Now we can see the price the buyer pays is going to be higher because of the taxes. For example, let's say you are buying a television for $1,000, and you go to the register and they ring it up and they say that'll be 1,100. That 100 is the taxes, and so therefore the price rises from the point of equilibrium to the price the buyer pays, PB, right? They're on the y-axis. So it goes up from PE, the equilibrium price, up to the price that the buyer pays. That represents the size of the tax. What happens is it ultimately has an impact on equilibrium because of that difference. Alternatively, let's say that the price of $1,000 that you see on the ticket, what do you call on the barcode on the TV, it's $1,000. Let's say that includes taxes. Isn't that nice when they do that? Oh, it includes taxes. Oh, that's nice. So what happens here is that the seller is receiving the sales tax that includes the tax. For example, you're buying a TV for $1,000. The seller says, well, that $1,000 includes the taxes. So you're only paying $1,000, right? Kind of. Technically, you're paying $900 for the TV. That additional $100 is for taxes. So we see the point of PS, which is what the price the seller receives. And that, of course, will ultimately shift the point of equilibrium as well. That's the effect on taxes. The revenue from taxes is found here in the shaded area. It's the point either above and or below the price of equilibrium. And so we can see the revenue from tax equation is the tax per unit times the number of units. The tax per unit times the number of units. That gives us the revenue from taxes. Now, sometimes you might be fortunate enough to buy goods without having to pay taxes. Oftentimes, this happens at the grocery store. The grocery store does not always charge sales tax. And the reason for that is some jurisdictions have a law where the grocery store cannot charge sales tax on certain food items. Okay? So if you go into Safeway and you buy an orange for 50 cents, you'll just pay 50 cents. There's no tax on oranges. Because certain jurisdictions have laws where they cannot tax perishable food items. So when there's a situation with a tax, we have a either, I guess, and or a consumer surplus or a producer surplus. The consumer surplus is represented by the areas of A, B, and C. We recall that area B would have been the revenue from taxes. But if there is no tax, then the consumer surplus is areas A, B, and C. If there was a tax, of course, it would not include area B. It's also possible that when there is revenue without taxes, we can have what's called a producer surplus. This includes areas D, E, and F. If taxes existed, this would not include area D, it would just be E and F. This is when the tax revenue is zero because there are no taxes. So the total surplus would encompass areas A, B, C, D, E, and F, of course. Total surplus, as you know, is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. When there are taxes included, the consumer surplus would be represented with areas A, and for producer surplus, it would be area F. The tax revenue, just as before, would be areas B and D. The total surplus area would be the consumer surplus area A plus the producer surplus area F. Plus, we would include the taxes B and D. It's important to note that the tax reduces the total surplus by areas C and E. Area C and E here is called a deadweight loss. The deadweight loss represents the area that cannot be allocated to surplus. The reason for this is because of what we call market distortion. This happens when we have taxes. because of taxes, we can account for the producer and consumer surplus, but and we can include the taxes, but we cannot account for the deadweight loss, which represents the market distortion from taxes. That would be area C plus E is called a deadweight loss. The deadweight loss is also said to occur when units cannot be sold because of taxes. The reason why something cannot be sold because of taxes is because when we add taxes into the price, the demand for the quantities will go down inherently. That's why we see quantity E minus quantity T, quantity equilibrium minus quantity tax. This cannot be sold because of taxes. That's what we call market distortion, right? We see that the quantity goes down as a result of taxation. And of course, the reason for that is we'll end up selling less because of the taxes. So here's a nice example, market for airline tickets. Okay, so market for airline tickets, we have a price of $200 at a quantity of 100. I'll be able to sell 100 airline tickets if each airline ticket is $200. That is also our point of equilibrium. So without taxes, I can have a consumer surplus of $200 times a base of 100. So height times base times half, right? So 0.5 times $200 price times $100, I'm sorry, 100 units base gives me a consumer surplus of $10,000. And of course, I'll have the same for the producer surplus, half times height times base gives me a producer surplus of 10,000. Our total surplus is 20,000. Now, of course, this is without taxes. When I include the taxes, I have a shift. Right? My uh, my price for the buyers goes up to $250. The buyers will pay $250, the $50 being taxed, right? Or my sellers will only receive $150 because of, again, the taxes, $50. So I have a new consumer surplus. It's half times $150 height times a 75 quantity base. We see that the height is now $150 because the price shifted from 200 to 250. So now that leaves us with a total height of 150. We got the 150, of course, from 400 minus the 250, right? New price. It's 150 times the new base of 75. That gives us a new consumer surplus of $5,625. And of course, the producer surplus, the same. Yeah, it's the new height time of time. I'm sorry, it's the new height of 150 times new base, 75 times half, which is 5,625 for the producers as well. The tax revenue here is $100 times 75 airline tickets, giving us a total tax revenue of $7,500. Our total surplus, that's consumer surplus of 5,625 plus producer surplus of 5,625, giving us a total surplus of 18,750. We have a dead weight loss of 1,250. How we got the dead weight loss? We have the height of 100. We have the width of 25 times 0.5, which is half. We get a dead weight loss of 1,250. That's this blue shaded area. Now, why does dead weight loss happen, right? As we know, dead weight loss is a result of taxation. It's the quantity that we would not be able to sell because of taxation. When we include taxes, the buyers pay more and the sellers receive less, right? And so that difference is called a dead weight loss. That's the loss of the number of units that we would have sold at the point of equilibrium. So what happens with dead weight loss? The elasticities of supply and demand, of course, become more elastic. When they're more elastic, we have what's called a larger dead weight loss. And when we have a dead weight loss, there's a greater elasticity of supply and demand. With a greater dead weight loss of a tax, we have a greater elasticity of supply and demand. So, elasticity. Elasticity, as you know, is the, how do I want to describe this? Willingness to buy represented in a range. Yeah. When things are elastic, think of a rubber band. A rubber band has elasticity, right? A rubber band, you can stretch it, and the further you can stretch it, it's said to have greater elasticity. If you can not stretch the rubber band that far, it has inelastic properties. Elasticity simply represents the willingness to buy in a range. Okay, it's the sensitivity of price to the marketplace. Sensitivity of price to a marketplace. If supply is inelastic, it's harder for companies to leave the market when the tax price is reduced. It's easier to leave the market when there's a greater range of taxes, which is elasticity. Inelasticity, meaning that there is very little, what do I call? Very little sensitivity to price changes. It's harder for firms to leave the market when there's little sensitivity to price changes. It's also more difficult for companies to close up because of the reduction in taxes. Taxes only reduces the quantity by a little bit. That's why you saw that the dead weight loss was so small in the earlier examples. When there's more elasticity, meaning more sensitivity to price in the marketplace, it's easier for firms to leave the market. When there's a decrease in quantity below the surplus, we maximize the available quantity, and there is a greater dead weight loss. So again, the way to think about elasticity is price sensitivity in the marketplace. When there's greater elasticity, it's easier for firms to leave the market. When there's less elasticity, it's harder for firms to leave the market. When there is inelasticity in demand, it's harder for consumers to leave the market. Meaning, when there's less sensitivity to price, consumers will not leave the market. Example, gasoline is very inelastic. Groceries are very inelastic. Housing is very inelastic. What do these things have in common? Who can tell me? What does housing, groceries, and gasoline have in common? Who can
They're
tell
all
me?
high price right now.
Well, I'm sorry, Miss Anthony. What was that?
I said they're all high priced right now. All is the
That's,
prices,
well,
all of them have gone up.
that's true. But what else is true about those three things? Housing, groceries, and gasoline.
They're limited.
They're limited. Um, that's true. But what else?
A necessity.
I'm sorry, Rochelle. What was that?
A necessity.
One more time.
A necessity.
Necessity. Thank you. That, yes, Rochelle, that is correct. They're needed. You can't survive without those things, right? You need housing, you need food, and you need to be able to get around. They're needed. Okay? That's why they're inelastic. It doesn't matter if it's $4 a gallon, $5 a gallon, $6 a gallon, you still need to get around. It doesn't matter if housing is 1,500, 1,800, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. You still need a house. It doesn't matter if the price of oranges or apples goes from 25 cents an apple to $1 an apple. You still got to eat. Okay. The thing that is most in common with those things is that you need them to live. Okay. Sure, you can eat oranges instead of apples, of course, but you still need groceries. Okay. You still need a roof over your head. It doesn't matter if it's a one bedroom, studio, or whatever. You still need a roof. You still need to eat. You still need to get around. They're all necessities. That's why they're inelastic. You do not have sensitivity to the price of those things simply because you need them to live. Make sense? That's
Yes.
wonderful. Thank you. That's why it's said that though the things that are of necessity are inelastic. You don't have price sensitivity to them. So if the taxes go up on those things, oh well, don't matter. So it's inelastic. Okay, so you still pay the additional taxes on those things. That's why the dead weight loss is so small when the quantity changes a little bit on those things because the demand is inelastic. Now, there's a couple things where demand is more elastic, of course, and these are on things that we typically do not need to live. Okay, an example of this: television. We don't need TVs to live. Are they nice to have? Absolutely. But are they a necessity of survival of humankind? No. Okay. But so therefore, the demand for televisions is going to be elastic. Okay. You're going to be sensitive to the different prices. Okay. You might not want to pay $1,000 for a new TV. So you might opt for one that's 500. You're more sensitive to the price changes. Okay, so if the taxes go up on television manufacturers uh, and they pass that tax on to you, the consumer, it's easy for you to say, you know what, I don't need that TV. Okay, it's more elastic, yeah. Which means that, of course, the deadweight loss for television is going to be greater. So that's the concept behind elasticity for things like demand, yeah. So these are good ones, yeah. That weight loss. If the tax goes up, is that weight loss going to be larger or relatively smaller for breakfast cereal or sunscreen? Yeah, smaller, right? You need the breakfast. Hotel rooms in the short run or hotel rooms in the long run, your debt weight loss is going to be much larger because we don't need hotel rooms. Groceries or meals at fancy restaurants. We don't need to eat at fancy restaurants, so the debt weight loss can be larger. These are fun. Okay. Yeah, you know, there's strange comparisons, honestly. It's always kind of fun to look at these things. Okay, taxation. Governments need tax revenue. That's why you pay federal taxes, you pay state DC taxes, and you pay city taxes. Okay, from your income taxes. That tax revenue funds the schools, police department, fire department, um, other city services, right? Uh, yeah, that's where your tax dollars go, right? Infrastructure, etc. That's why taxes are really, really important. Um, Now, when you go to the grocery store or you go to a restaurant, you might pay some sales tax. And that sales tax gets remitted through through the business to the tax agencies. The business also pays taxes, right? So the business pays sales tax and you pay the customer sales tax. All of those taxes go to these municipalities to fund various things. So that's why taxes are important. I personally don't like having to pay the IRS, but I have to pay them. And for some reason, they always want more than what I think is their fair share, but that's just my opinion. Uh, in politics, there's always an argument between large government or small government. And a lot of it has to do with taxes. The more services the government provides, it will require more taxes, right? And very simple. This is a very simple thing. The government spends money. It's not their money that they're spending, it's your money that they're spending. Every time the government does something silly, like bails out a city finance, or they decide to invest money into new highway system, or they decide to give everyone a little bit of money. Right? like during the pandemic. All that spending leads to problems like inflation that we're seeing right now. The reason why we have inflation in the United States right now is because your federal government spent too damn much money trying to bail the country out of a problem that they thought was bigger than it actually was. Yes, that's true. So, what it needs to happen now, because the government is going to run out of money, they need to raise taxes in order to keep funding these big government programs. That's the idea behind big government. The larger they are, the more taxes they take in. The smaller government is, the less taxes they take in. Because remember, for every federal employee, how do you think they get paid? They get paid from the federal government. Who pays the federal government? You do, through your taxes. So just think about that. Taxes on income. It's the biggest source of government revenue. We pay federal income tax, state DC income tax, and city income tax. Okay? All these income taxes go to fund the government. That is the biggest source of their revenue. Typically, a rule of thumb, if you're looking to switch jobs, some of you might be job jumpers, or what do they call silent quitters, or whatever's. Uh, if you ever want to figure out what your take home pay is going to be, set aside 1/3 for taxes. Set aside 1/3 for taxes. So one in every $3, that goes to taxes. Okay, that's not your money. It's the government, right? That's how they get most of their revenue. Some believe labor supply is fairly inelastic. Yeah, that's probably true to some degree. Uh, it's a fun case study, you know. The Laffer curve. This is very accurate for the most part. Laffer curve is kind of like a bell curve. Uh, it represents the federal income tax rates in the United States. And it's designed to help economists understand how tax dollars are being brought into the government system. And, it's kind of like a bell curve, really, the Laffer curve is. That's for another time, the Laffer curve. We could spend a whole course on that. Now, this is important. Size of the tax. Sometimes the government will adjust the tax rates. Yeah, Congress decides on the tax rates, as you know. And when Congress makes a decision to change the tax rates, that has an impact on everyone. Yeah. It so a tax revenue, if the government reduces the individual income tax rates, that means that the people have more money to spend. And but that also means that the government will collect less money. So someone has to fill that gap. When the government raises the tax rates, that means they have more to spend, but that also means that you don't have more to spend. Right? So, yeah, these changes, they have big impacts on society and on the way that we do things. Size of the tax. If there's a doubling in the tax rate, it's typically causes the deadweight loss to double as well. So, going back to the TV example, if the TV's $1,000, the buyer pays $100, the seller pays $100 for the taxes on selling that TV, right? So if the tax rate doubled, now you're paying $200, the seller's paying $200, the price is still $1,000. Okay, we can see that the seller is going to sell a lot less. The quantity demand is going to go way down. Okay, because no one wants to pay double the tax rate. But if the tax rate doubles, that means that weight loss will double. If it triples, it's even worse. Instead of paying $100 in taxes, now we're paying $300 in taxes on that same TV. The margin becomes so thin for the seller on a $1,000 TV because ultimately $300 being paid by the buyer, $300 being paid by the seller. That leaves them with what, $400 margin on that $1,000 TV. That's really going to cause a lot less of televisions to be sold Q1 to Q3. That's what shows on the bottom. But it also triples the deadweight loss. So in summary, when taxes go up, the quantity demand is going to go down, right? And the deadweight loss is going to rise. Now, that's the summary of the whole thing. Taxes go up, quantity goes down, deadweight loss goes up. So deadweight loss goes up when the taxes go up. They're mutually exclusive. Deadweight loss goes up when taxes go up. Deadweight loss goes up when taxes go up. That's what you got to remember. Yeah, they're mutually exclusive. When the tax rate is small, increasing it causes the tax revenue to rise, which makes sense, right? So if there's a rise in taxes, that means the government receives more revenue, more tax revenue. But this also means that the deadweight loss will increase. Because remember, when taxes go up, deadweight loss increases. And when the tax rates are large and they continue to go up, ultimately this causes tax revenue to fall. Here's why. Here's what I want you to think about this. The more the taxes go up, the less people are going to buy. Right? On the $1,000 TV, if originally the tax was $100, and then it doubles, $200, and then it triples, $300, people are going to stop buying TVs at that point because the taxes on a TV went so high. What will ultimately happen is it'll cause the tax revenue to go down because people are buying less TVs. That's what Q3 represents. Q1 to Q2 to Q3. Tax rate goes up, less people are going to buy it, so therefore less tax revenue will come in. The Laffer curve. It's a bell curve, just like I was saying earlier. This represents the relationship of the taxes and tax revenue. We can see that there's a nice point here, okay? The higher the taxes go, you would think higher the tax revenue. That's not true. At some point, it levels off and then starts to go down, okay? Because less people will be engaged in the market if the taxes are too high. Okay? I'm not going to buy another TV if the tax rate goes through the roof. Real simple. So that's why you see it level off and start to drop after a certain point. That's what the Laffer curve tells us. So yeah, there's a correlation there's a correlation between tax revenue, total taxes. The higher the total taxes go up, ultimately, over time, less tax revenue will be collected. Because less people are going to buy if the tax rate goes too high. Very simple. So taxes are a good thing for the most part. They help society as a whole. Yeah, definitely. Because we got to fund the government. The government funds the schools, the roads, the police departments, the fire departments, all the city services, right? So it's a good, taxes are a good thing. Mostly a good thing. But the higher the taxes go, it adds to the deadweight loss. Yeah. So things to think about. When it comes to elasticity, elasticity represents the sensitivity that a buyer has to the price. Okay, greater elasticity, the more sensitive you are to the price. Most things are elastic. However, we know that there's some things that are inelastic. Gasoline, housing, groceries, the necessities, right? Those are relatively inelastic because we know that regardless of what happens to the price or the taxes, we're still going to need those things. Okay, that's the end of our discussion on taxes. Let's please stand by. We're going to shift gears and talk about international trade. Hold on just a sec.